Do you take daily?
Bam! Uh-oh, look at that, 1 o'clock and 8 seconds. CCTV, Brother R.A. in his place where he's supposed to be doing what he gotta do. Oh my goodness, what's the calendar say? Oh, today is actually, that's CCTV. Kids, come on down, produce your own programming. Do like Brother R.A. Ha ha ha. And yes, that's right, this is Brother R.A. And there we go. And you know, all you gotta do is come to this page. Once you type in brotherra.com up the top, then you hit the YouTube and you get to see all the shows in the past that are up there. And here, let me just give you some other inside thoughts since I'm on the web page. Now, the shadow of the pyramid makes a pyramid, and then a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So that's the parents and whoever built these buildings, just like I made reference last week, somebody wants to build a wall. Well, the science of the ancestors, what did they do? They built an edifice that had a square bottom, 4 90-degree angles, and then it rose to the top. And so that was the male and the female, and they rose up from their base of 360 degrees to a full sphere. And at the top of the pyramid, on the back of your dollar bill, you see the all-seeing eye. But then these individuals had the tenacity to not only show the mother and the father, but they showed a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which is the child. And do you see the child and the gap? I mean, you see the distance between the side of the shadow and the top of the shadow? You see this side is all lit up? I'm like, yeah, I wonder who was it that built those things. And as we discuss that, as you look at those pictures and study that a little bit more, let me show you the next picture before I even begin to read. Let's go to the cube. Look at the cube. Acknowledge the cube, please. See that? It looks like a crucifix, but then it all folds. Does that make sense to you? Each one of those is square. Now, how many squares is that? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares, and it makes a cube. Yeah, did I count that right? You figure it out. But the crucifix, the base of the pyramid, and who do you serve? Do you serve yourself, or do you serve an energy outside of yourself? And are you capable of acknowledging, do you let yourself go that deep into who you are as a divine energy, that this is the image they came up with most recently about the Milky Way galaxy as warped? Yeah. Warped and twisted Milky Way. So, February, Black Hour Story Month, on the 1st, 1965, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and more than 200 others are arrested and jailed after a voting rights march in Selma, Alabama. 1866, on the 2nd, Frederick Douglass and other black leaders met with President Andrew Johnson to advocate for black citizens' voting rights, which Johnson opposes. And let's go to today. Today is February 6th, the day before Victor's birthday. In 1902, a mob of 200 white people seizes a 19-year-old black man, Thomas Brown, from jail and lynches him on the courthouse lawn after he is accused of assault in Nicholasville, Kentucky. Is the Milky Way warped, or is the values of those that we live under warped? What about individuals' mindsets? And I do have a particular thought here in one of my notepads about, are you balanced in harmony? You can justify anything in your logic, but how does your logic interrelate or integrate with the one verse, the universe? Which chapter of the one verse is your logic? Melanin dominant ancestors integrated the logic of the cube, or let's say a room, any room that you're in. How many edges or corners of that room do you acknowledge? Now, in that room, can you find its axis? Can you find the axis in your space? That axis is the one, the way it is drawn. Look at how the one is drawn. Now, how do you convey such type of information? If you're in that cube, can you find that axis? Are you constantly in the axis, right there in the center of all the squares, in all aspects of your humanity? Here's the center there, there's the center. Now on the bottom, are you in the center of the bottom too, as it folds up under and goes from the bottom to the top? Are you in the center? Just a thought. Spent enough time there. Okay. I mean, when you draw a one, it has to stop somewhere, just like, say, this could be visualized as a 1, if you would, you know? But it had to stop somewhere. This is the 1. Now, are you the one tapping into all aspects of your mind and brain and infinity and the full sphere? Okay, so that's that aspect. We dealt with the and we dealt with that, and we're gonna get to some more W.E.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois is reading, or he makes reference to at some point in his discussion about this particular individual here. Are you at all familiar with any types of awareness or consciousness of you yourself? Boom. What's this say? Hugo Munsterberger, Department of Psychology, Harvard Psychology. He came to Harvard in 1892 with a doctorate in psychology. earned under the supervision of Wilhelm Wundt at the University of, and what's it say over here on the side? He was a pioneer in applied psychology, extended his research and theories to industrial organizational, here, let's open that up some more. Is that going to say what I need to say? Okay, legal, organizational, legal, medical, clinical, educational, business settings. Munsterberg encountered immense turmoil with the outbreak of the First World War. So, this individual at Harvard, and here, let's just share some of the information from the hidden history of Massachusetts. I'm going to read more and more of this book and delve deep. And you know, y'all would be talking about, oh, R.A., you're just this and you're just that and blah, blah, blah. And can I even come up over here? No, that's too dark, huh? I can't get there. Okay, so I need to stay in the light and sit up in my chair. And so I made reference to Harvard, right? And in the hidden history of Massachusetts, on page 58, the Ku Klux Klan, the Bay State chapter. The Ku Klux Klan gained a strong foothold in the hinterlands of the free and liberal state of Massachusetts, where whites swelled in the membership roster of the Hooded Order. It was led by Harvard graduate Charles Jacobs, among others, and flourished in the 1920s in the Worcester area. Harvard University itself boasted of its own chapter of the KKK. Harvard had a KKK. Go Patriots! Yeah, let's be a let's be a colonist and support that Tom melanin recessive inbred mutant albino with a calcified pineal gland Brady. You call that a Super Bowl? Once the black man got the ball, what is it, that mutant for the Rams, he got the ball in the black man's hands and he fell down and he's like, shit, I'm gonna roll for yardage. So how many more black quarterbacks will there be inducted into the league next year? Just a question. So, as I was reading, Harvard University itself boasted of its own chapter of the KKK, a fact that was duly reported in the venerable school paper, the Harvard Crimson. Worcester KKK. In 1924 and 1925, the KKK fought white groups for control of the streets of Worcester. The black population was negligible in Massachusetts' boondocks. So the Klan targeted Southern Europeans, Italians, Spanish, Jews, and others, whose skin tone hints of their African ancestry. The Klan had two centers of strength in the city. Quinsigamond, that's like almond or Quinsigamund village, Worcester's largest Swedish neighborhood, and Greendale, home for the Norton Company, where many of the Klansmen worked. Imperial wizard Hiram Wesley Evans proclaimed that the KKK represented the true Americanism. Go Patriots, true Americanism! And the two Worcester newspapers agreed that publicly supported the Klan. In October of 1924, Worcester hosted a grand convocation where thousands of Massachusetts whites assembled for a mass induction ceremony. Is that like the Patriots' Day parade that happened yesterday? An estimate of Massachusetts Klan membership reaches as high as 130,000 for the year 1925. One meeting that took place in Townsend in 1924 was attended by about 150 Massachusetts Ku Kluxers. The road was patrolled by motorcycle police who were aided by deputies and probably state police. When a reporter was found to be spying on a KKK gathering, hooded Klansmen seized him and with a heated iron and torch brand the letter K on his forehead and left arm. Riots between Klansmen and anti-Klansmen occurred in the towns of Haverhill, Lancaster, Spencer, Upton, Worcester, resulting in the hurtling of bottles and stones and the firing of guns. The unrest resulted in the scores of injuries and several court cases. A wealthy, sophisticated town of Groton was called the center of the Massachusetts Klanhood. In 1924 and in 1927, some Klansmen actually endorsed town officials in successful elections. This is the hidden history of Massachusetts. In 1931, the Imperial Wizard went on a tour of New England, accompanied by gatherings of hooded white men, complete with cross burnings. Ku Klux Klan activity was reported in many towns where blacks are scarce today, such as Sudbury, Wellesley, Newton, and Framingham. The Klan eventually found environs of Springfield much more hospitable. And in 1926, thousands of white hooded crackers showed up in September for a fourth-day gathering in Agawam. Thousands more of New England's finest attended the following June, setting the tone for race relations in the Bay State that prevails today. And it goes on to talk about the Great Walls of Massachusetts, hard evidence of black slavery in the Bay State. 19 minutes in, got to keep track of that time. Here, let's just read this. There is something about the white race that causes black Negro to be repugnant to it. We do not mind so much coming in contact with the bright, shiny-faced mulatto, but when it comes to the flat-nosed, thick-lipped type, there is greater aversion. Almost everywhere I went in the North, I heard complaints against the black Negroes from the South. Often I heard it said, those who come from the South are so black. This was Hannibal Gerald Duncan, 1922. Let's, The twisted morality of white rule. It will not do to grant them to be men, lest it appear that whites are not. This is Monte, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, Montesquieu. Beyond their inspired rhetorical flourishes professing their love of liberty and freedom, little else is admirable about the early society set up by the white colonial invaders. For a puritanical society best known for its piety and faith, its citizens committed a remarkable amount of immorality and debauchery, a fact that has been artfully obscured in Massachusetts memory by a facade of spelling bees, church picnics, hay rides, and sleigh rides of early New England folklore. Much of the behavior that appalls many Americans today, behavior imbibed daily, daily from the TV offerings of Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, Ricky Lake, was very much commonplace in colonial Massachusetts. For example, the liquor that fueled the slave trade also coursed through the colonists' veins, accounting for some portion of their legendary racial venom. In 1637, there were 11 distinct degrees of criminal drunkenness: tripping or tripling, common tripling, drinking, much in drink, excessive drinking, suspicion of drunkenness, distempered with drink, disguised with drink, overtaken with drink, overcome with drink, second drunk. Boston, with only a handful of churches by the Revolution, had at once 150 taverns. In Essex County, there were 108. Bristol County had 66. In Middlesex County, there were no less than 226 bar rooms in 1767. It was estimated that enough rum was being consumed to supply every man, woman, and child in the colony with 4 gallons every year. Promiscuity was common among the founding fathers, as it was in the Clinton administration or the Boston Archdiocese. Sexual offenses were at least 3 times as numerous as any other class of crimes. Veritable icons of colonial Boston, such as Thomas Fleet and Zabdal Boylston, are all defendants in bastardy. Bastardi cases? I don't speak all this. I was colonized. Forgive my rendition of English. Church record shows that it was not considered sinful to bear a child in the 7th month after marriage. At least 4 churches formally voted no question should be asked about such circumstances. Untold and unrecorded are the sexual assaults against black and Indian women and children, which are doubtless widespread, some having been purchased for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Bostonians are described in 1686 by a noted writer who pulled no punches about the character of America's first criminals. He called them the most profligate, Profligate, and debauched wretches in the world. Their profession of religion teach them only how to sin more refinedly. Between Boston sinners and saints, he calculated these hypocrites are the far greater number. White immorality had become so entrenched in the Puritan colony that church leaders lost control of the Christmas celebration, which was by 1712 firmly in the hands of Satan's missions. Puritan Cotton Mather put it this way in 1712. The feast of Christ's nativity is spent in reveling, dicing, carding, masking, and in all licentious liberty, by mad mirth, by long eating, by hard drinking, by lewd gaming, by rude reveling. Often people blacken their faces or disguise themselves as animals or cross-dress, presumably to maintain anonymity for harder, ruder acts. Similar accounts of early Christmas abound. Reverend Henry Bourne decried transvestism and uncleanliness and debauchery, as well as rampant unlawful fornication or chambering. Indeed, there was a marked increase in the number of births in the months of September and October, meaning that sexual activity peaked during the Christmas season. Puritans took the drastic step of outlawing the holiday altogether in 1659 and fined those who skipped work or celebrated in any way 5 shillings. Also outlawed the days Thursday and Saturday. The names, that is, because of their Saturn's Day. because of their pagan origins. Thursday means Thor's Day and Saturday means Saturn's Day. The holiday was reinstated in 1681, but before it was roundly condemned as blasphemous, the far removed way of Jesus. Drunken mobs occasionally ran wild in the city. According to one historian, smashed property and frightening respectable citizens into hiding. It was not uncommon for a victim to be beaten, stripped naked, rubbed in the snow, tied to a horse, and carried or dragged on a rail out of town. A red-painted whipping post was prominent in Boston's main square, where women brought in cages on carts were stripped to the waist and flogged, most often just for being a woman. Oh, does Harvard have just the male version of the school, and then Harvard has the female version of the college, like a Leslie or what is the other one? There's another Harvard female school. Yeah, that's because all the guys, no, we can't have women in school here. Melanin recess, I'm just like, okay, these are our children misbehaving. I, as Father Nature, have to acknowledge the calcified pineal gland and loss of gateway or passage or tapping into one's divinity. I'm the one that inbred melanin dominant people, mothers and fathers of humanity, and we inbred, and in the cold, dark, overcast environments, you know, they had to become cave dwellers, looking like those bearded white men. They didn't have razors back then, but shut up, R.A. Hurry up and get to the DuBios piece. I'm not going to get too much DuBios in today, am I? I'm reading The Hidden History of Massachusetts. Yeah. Go, Patriots, go. They beat those red men, the Colons, the colonists, the Patriots. Yeah, Boston's New England. Not the old England, but the New England Patriots. The ones that got kicked out of old England and came and created their own colony by exterminating the red man. And we're still doing that today in 2019. Oh, let's get Tom Brady to beat Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs. That wasn't his fault. I still say it's the coach's fault. It could have been won in regulation time, and Brady would have never got to the Super Bowl. But where was I? Okay. We're talking about red painting. A red painted whipping post was prominent in Boston's main square, where women brought in cages on carts were stripped to the waist and flogged, most often just for being women. A pillory was affixed to a platform right in front of the State House. There, an offender's head and hands were fastened so that he was unable to move. About the square were instruments of punishment called stocks, which confined and forcibly restrained prisoners' legs for sport. Passers-by would belt the captive with vegetables. Looking 2 centuries ahead in 1866, records show that New England had retained the vitality of its traditions, 25 white men were jailed on Deer Island for idleness, 2 for torturing a horse, 6 for fornication, 1 for keeping a disorderly house, 1 for playing ball on the Lord's Day, 3 for throwing objects in the street, and 1 for molesting a cow. 19th century Boston was the home of brothels, jilt shops, saloons, rat pits, dance halls, theaters of lewd entertainment, gambling joints, and boarding houses of the lowest type. A police raid on a single night in 1851 netted 165 criminals. Another resulted in the arrest of 150 prostitutes. Ratting, a sport where a dog is let loose in a ring with 20 live rats for the purpose of killing them within allotted time, was a popular Boston pastime. The sport of gouging was the cruelest activity of all. 2 men wrestled until one could maneuver his thumbs to press out the eyeballs of his opponent, the contest ending with a one-eyed wretch howling for mercy. One suspects that the legend of the one-eyed pirate might have its origin in this extremely popular Boston pastime. The skill of the white historians in obscuring the depraved behavior and the true nature of founding fathers has to be admired. But once the history is uncovered, one ought to find it incredible that these same founding fathers engaged in the traffic of black human beings. Go New England Patriots. Okay, so Harvard had its KKK, and I read that particular chapter. I wanted to read some of the, y'all remember that picture, how the Massachusetts slave ships were made here in Massachusetts? Or, yeah. Oh no, we don't participate in the slave trade, but we'll make the ships. We'll make money off of that. Yeah, right-o. Go get 'em! And so with W.E.B. Du Bois, let's go ahead and share Du Bois's picture and Booker T. Washington, and this is not going to play for me. You can just look at those pictures. I will read their words. Or Du Bois, this man here, he talked about the talented 10th, and this man here, this is Booker T. Washington, and he was the president of Fisk, but he believed in submitting to the ways of the white man. And Du Bois was not about submitting to the white man. But let's continue in the Massachusetts Review. This is my reading of W.E.B. Du Bois, a Negro student at Harvard at the end of the 19th century. It's in the past few weeks. If y'all missed it last week, then yeah, go back hit the YouTube, on Brother RA page. When you go to this page here and you hit that there, and it brings up last week's show. So there they go. Boom. Brother RA, YouTube, and last week's shows. But now I'm going to read to you W.E.B. Du Bois. Only once or twice did I come to surface of college life. First, I found by careful calculation I needed the cash of one of the Boylston prizes in oratory to piece out my year's expenses. I got through winning a second oratorical prize. The occasion was noteworthy by the fact that other black student, Clement Morgan, got first prize at the same contest. With the increase at Harvard of students who had grown up outside New England, there arose at this time a certain resentment at the way New England students were dominating and conducting college affairs. The class marshal on commencement day was always a Saltonstall, a Cabot, or a Lowell, or from some such New England family. The crew and most of the heads of other athletic teams were selected, from similarly limited social groups. The class poet, the class orator, and other commencement officials invariably were selected because of family, not of merit. It so happened that when the officials of the class of 1890 were being selected in early spring, a plot ripened. Personally, I knew nothing of it and was not greatly interested. But in Boston and in the Harvard Yard, the result of the elections was of tremendous significance, for the conspiratorial clique selected Clement Morgan as the class orator. New England, and indeed the whole country, reverberated. Morgan was a black man. He had been working in a barber shop in St. Louis at the time when he ought to have been in school. With the encouragement of help of a colored teacher whom he later married, he came to Boston and entered the Latin school. This meant that when he finally entered Harvard, he entered as a freshman in the orthodox way and was well acquainted with his classmates. He was fairly received considering his color. He was a pleasant, unassuming person, one of the best speakers of clear enunciated English. Best speakers of clearly enunciated English on campus. In his junior year, he had earned the first Boylston Prize for oratory in the same contest where I had won second prize. It was then logical for him to become the class orator, and yet this was against all the traditions of America. There were editorials in the leading newspapers, and the South especially raged and sneered at the audience of black washerwomen who would replace Boston society at the next Harvard commencement. Morgan's success was contagious, and that year and the next several leading Northern colored students become the class orators. Ex-President Hayes, as I shall relate later, sneered at this fact, while, as I have said, I have nothing to do with the plot, and was not even present at the election which chose Morgan. I was greatly pleased at this breaking of the color line. Morgan and I became fast friends and spent the summer giving readings along the North Shore to defray our college cost. Harvard of this day was a great opportunity for a young man and a young American Negro, and I realized it. I formed habits of working rather different from those of most of the other students. I burned no midnight oil. I did my studying in the daytime and had my day parceled out almost to the minute. I spent a great deal of time in the library. I did my assignments with thoroughness and with prevision of the kind of work I wanted to do later. From the beginning, my relations with most of the teachers at Harvard were pleasant. They were, on the whole, glad to receive a serious student, to whom extracurricular activities were not paramount importance, and one who in a general way knew what he wanted. Harvard had, in the social sciences, no such leadership of thought, and breadth of learning, of learning as in the philosophy, literature, and physical science. She was then groping, and is still groping, towards a scientific treatment of human action. She was facing the end of the century, a tremendous economic era. The United States finance was succeeding and monopolizing transportation and raw materials like sugar, coal, and oil. The power of the trust and the combine was so great that the Sherman Act was passed in 1890. On the other hand, the tariff at the demand of manufacturers continued to rise in height from the McKinley to the indefensible Wilson tariff, making that denomination easier. The understanding between the industrial North and the New South was being perfected. And beginning in 1890, a series of disfranchising laws were enacted by the Southern states that was disdained in the next 16 years to make voting by Southern Negroes practically impossible. A financial crisis shook the land in 1893, and a popular discontent showed itself in the populist movement and the Coxey Army. The whole question of the burden of taxation began to be discussed. These things we discussed with some clearness and factual understanding in Harvard. The tendency was towards English free trade and against the American tariff policy. We reverenced Ricardo and wasted long hours on the wages fund. I remember Tüssig course supporting dying Ricardian economics. Wages came from what employers had left for labor after they had subtracted their own reward. Suppose that this profit was too small to attract the employer. What would the poor worker do but starve? The trust and the monopolies were viewed, frankly, as dangerous enemies of democracies, but at the same time was inevitable methods of industry. We were strong for the gold standard and fearful of silver. On the other hand, the attitude of Harvard toward labor was on the whole contemptuous and contemporary, condemnatory. Strikes like that of the anarchists in Chicago and the railway strike of 1886 and the horrible Homestead strike of 1892 and the Coxey's Army of 1894 were pictured as ignorant, lawless, lurching against conditions largely inevitable. Karl Marx was mentioned only to point out how thoroughly his thesis had been disproven. Of the theory itself, almost nothing was said. Henry George was given but tolerant notice. The anarchists of Spain and the nihilists of Russia and the British miners, all these were viewed not as part of political and economic development, but sporadic evil. This was natural. Harvard was a child of its era. The intellectual freedom of flowering of the late 18th and early 19th century were yielding to the deadening economic pressure which would make Harvard rich but reactionary. Let me make sure I say that right. The intellectual freedom and flowering of the late 18th and early 19th century were yielding to the deadening economic pressure which would make Harvard rich but reactionary. This defender of wealth and capital, already half ashamed of Sumner and Phillips, was willing finally to replace an Eliot with a manufacturer and nervous warmonger. The social community that mobbed Garrison easily electrocuted Sacco and Vassetti. It was not until I was long out of college and had finished my studies of economics and politics that I realized the fundamental influence man's efforts to earn a living had upon all his other efforts. The politics which we studied in college were conventional, especially when it came to describing and elucidating the current scene in Europe. The Queen's Jubilee in June 1887, while I was at Fisk, set the pattern of our thinking. The little old woman at Windsor became a magnificent symbol of empire. Here was England with her flag draped around the world, ruling more black folk than white, and leading the colored peoples of the earth to Christian baptism, and as we assumed, to civilization and eventually self-rule. In 1885, Stanley, the traveling American reporter, became a hero and a symbol of the white world leadership in Africa. The wild, fierce fight for the Mahandi and the driving of the English out of the Sudan for 13 years did not reveal their inner truths to me. I heard only of the martyrdom of the drunken Bible reader and the freebooter, Chinese Gordon. After the Congo Free State was established, the Berlin Conference of 1885 was reported to be an act of civilization against the slave trade and liquor. French, English, and Germans pushed on in Africa, but I did not question the interpretation which pictured this as the advancement of civilization and the benevolent tutelage of barbarians. I read from the confirmation of the Triple Alliance in 1891. Later, I saw the celebration of the renewed Triple Alliance and the Temple Hofferfeld with the new young Emperor Wilhelm II, who, fresh from his dismal of Bismarck, had the splendid pageantry, and finally, the year I left Germany, Nicholas II became Tsar of all the Russias. And all this, I had not yet linked the political development of Europe with the race problem in America. I was repeatedly a guest in the home of William James. He was my friend and guide to clear thinking. Okay, so we're going to have to leave him alone and come back to this. And so that was W.E.B. Du Bois, and he argues with Booker T. Washington, and I read The Hidden History of Massachusetts, and y'all can continue to cheer for patriots if you want, but all I'm saying is melanin dominant people think it's not illegal yet. Are we capable of thinking and looking within ourselves?